So, welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business Podcast. With me today, I have Joseph Michelli, who is Chief Customer Experience Officer for the Michelli Experience. Hi, Joseph.
Hello, Adrian. It's good to be here.
How you doing? You all right?
I am awesome. Thank you for asking. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much. So, Joseph, for the benefit of our listeners and readers, can you tell us a little bit about you and a bit about the work that you do?
Well, I have a PhD in organizational development, so I think that renders me completely helpless in the universe. But I do, in fact, consult, much like you. I mean, I speak and I consult in the space of trying to make brands better at driving customer loyalty and getting more referrals. So I happen to write a few books along the way with some of my clients. And so, yeah, that's where I am in my life journey.
So the latest book off the production line is a book called Driven to Delight, delivering world-class customer experience the Mercedes Benz way, no less.
Yes, that's the latest. And there have been a few about Starbucks and Ritz-Carlton and Zappos, a little shoe company here in the U.S. And yeah.
Excellent. So can you tell me about the new book? Tell me about Driven to Delight. Tell me about kind of why you wrote it, how you came about to write it, just to give us a bit of context.
Yeah, most of the books I've written about companies that have been obsessed about customers their entire life cycle. And Mercedes Benz is really a product company. They claim to have created the automobile, and they are just very proud of their engineering excellence, their commitment to engineering innovation. But when it comes right down to it, they have not been known for their ability to deliver an engaging experience in dealerships in the United States. In fact, they were around about 22nd when it came to service on our, gold standard metric, the J.D. Power. So the customer-facing metric told everybody that they were slightly above Mazda. So it was not something they were really proud about when their brand value proposition is to be best or nothing. So there was a definite need to transform into a experience-based, customer-obsessed company, and that's what this book's about.
I mean, that's really fascinating because, as you say, the book's the story of a transformation of a legacy and product-centric organization and culture. And I think that's something that's probably going to be really relevant and it's going to resonate with many of my listeners and readers because it offers a real insight and a dose of reality in terms of the level of work and time that's required to make that sort of transformational kind of change. So can you tell us a little bit about that part of the story, about the level of the sort of timescales that are involved with Mercedes Benz USA's case, and then also how did the USA's business fit in with the global business as well?
That's a great question. That it said you can't be a little bit pregnant, and I think to be in the customer experience space, you got to be fully in. And tragically, I think the reason that we're seeing such failures among many brands who aspire to deliver great customer experience is because they're just doing initiatives and they're doing one-offs and they're trying to do this project or that project, many of which don't yoke together in any kind of meaningful way. So, this is an all-in commitment, and the CEO of Mercedes-Benz, who was responsible for the transformation, claimed it to be his legacy. He said, "This is what I will be known for. This is how I will go down." He put it out publicly in automotive news and all the major trade magazines. And so he was out there for it. And he also made some very straightforward promises to the dealer body here in the United States in terms of how he would help them look at the customer journey, how he would help them measure the customer journey, how he would help them line up the success in this to their profitability. And so I think that is just this top level engagement. Beyond that, everything that involved people, process, or technology was geared around moving numbers and hearts and minds of employees and customers. And so that's what they did. And that was designated to be a 4-year project at the onset. At the time I wrote it, we're 3 years in. And it continues on. He has now moved on to another gig, if you will. And the follow-up CEO, in his wisdom, said, "I'm not going to change the recipe. We had a successful one going, and I'm not going to move off of that as our strategic objective."
Well, that's refreshing that you've got an incoming CEO who's decided that I'm not going to change something and I'm going to just kind of make sure that we deliver on that, because sometimes that's not necessarily the norm. So that's quite refreshing to hear.
It is absolutely. And I think every CEO should kind of limit themselves to how many things they want to be known for, because executing against a very tight set of objectives works a lot better than being omnibus. So anyway, it was it was all in, though. At every department, every single individual was centered around this theme called Driven to Delight. And the transformation from being less than satisfying to a delighting brand at the experience level was a full-time occupation for everyone.
What's fascinating as well, because there's some people I've spoken to before, other organizations, both, of a similar size and also, smaller, and what they've said is that actually it's about 4 years is probably a good average sort of almost like indication of how long it will take to almost do a root and branch transformation or complete change of your business in terms of changing the direction and getting everything right. So it's quite interesting to hear that seems to be a number that keeps coming out, and it takes this amount of time, and if you're not up for that, then you shouldn't even get started in many ways.
Absolutely. And Adrian, I know your commitment is to help people have very practical tools and not a really frilly journey, but really a spot on point journey. And I think that's what Mercedes Benz was really committed to as well. And I think when you say 4 years, it starts to sound like lots of dollars. It's just going to cost us to move the needle. And the beauty of it was they also committed to be budget neutral in this. And so that they had to carve out and stop doing things that were not adding value to customers. They also had to practice the discipline of rethinking the brand from the customer's perspective instead of just trying to, do the programs they were doing, but incrementally from their vantage point. So rather than just making it 10% faster in some area where the customer doesn't even perceive it, they would stop doing those initiatives and focus on initiatives that would actually be perceptible to the customer. So in the end, this did not cost them any more money, even though they dedicated full commitment and focus to it over 4 years.
That's nice. I mean, and so tell me, how did Mercedes Benz USA, were they influenced by Mercedes Benz globally, or did they end up influencing Mercedes Benz globally? How did that relationship work?
Mercedes Benz globally has their own initiatives on customer experience, but you have to understand that in different parts of the world, the interest in customer experience is different. Yeah. In fact, I was asked once to consult in China, and it was really an interesting conversation because they said, we want you on retainer, but we don't think we want to use you anytime soon because we're having enough problems developmentally, just getting enough distribution to first-time car buyers that we'd love to have the problem of worrying about will they buy from us again. But right now we need to get the cars in the first-time car buyers. And so what you see, I think, in different parts of the world are different developmental challenges. Sure. Customer loyalty is not important if you can't even get your cars to first-generation buyers. Yeah. So, but in the United States, it's a very mature market. I mean, this thing has been around generation. And so churn and the attractiveness to alternative brands like Lexus, which is, the Japanese automakers trying to match head for head on quality on the luxury side. And many of the Japanese brands, particularly in the United States, Lexus was just the brand when it came to customer experience. They came to the market later. They had the best of the best Toyota dealers selected. They had a customer manifesto. Their buildings all looked the same. So they came in with a strong customer commitment. Mm-hmm. And Mercedes had to do catch-up here in this market. Right. That said, because so much was going on in the United States market and they were ahead in most ways to the global initiatives, they became the breeding ground for ideas. And I can tell you, just yesterday I signed 2,000 of these books that are going up to Mercedes-Benz Canada. Right. So, I mean, I think that's where you're seeing this kind of cross-pollination with the United States being in the forefront because of where they are in the maturity of the market and the importance of the market to the global strategy of the brand.
So you're almost like a pipette of ink or a drop of ink into a big, large glass of water, and you're sort of gradually colouring the whole thing by just, from one market out the way.
Absolutely.
So tell me, the interesting thing is that if we go back to that sort of that idea about it's about 4 years in terms of the whole transformational effort now, and then there's a reality in just any business, but particularly in corporate, in terms of staff and exec sort of turnover. So the average tenure in a job might be somewhere in the region of, 2 years maybe. And if you've got a program that is kind of 4 years long, how did they kind of work that? Because a lot of this stuff kind of requires commitments from people to continue on the personal commitments from people to continue on the work. So how did they manage that sort of staff and exec sort of turnover? Was that all about onboarding and defining the vision and the philosophy and things?
It's worse than what you just described in that Mercedes, in the middle of this, moved its corporate headquarters where they had been for decades in New Jersey to Atlanta, Georgia, and so they took a massive talent hit because a lot of the people who worked in the corporate headquarters for Mercedes had spouses who worked in New York City, and so it wasn't quite as easy to transfer down to Atlanta, Georgia, with a flick of a wrist. So they took a big talent bleed in the middle of this. Truthfully, I think that they had developed the core of their leadership team, and they had sufficient amount of talent at the tipping point to make sure that they didn't lose in that, and actually tried to look at the insurgence of new talent as a critical variable, but onboarding was essential and enculturation was essential. And they spent a lot of money and time developing a brand immersion center and leadership training skills that all embed into the culture, the centricity of customers. So, I think they definitely took a little bit of a wound through that. But, I think they'll come out on the other side better for the entrepreneurial spirit and the new blood that's infused into the context of customer centricity.
I guess it I'm just kind of thinking about you're in the middle of this big program and then you decide to kind of move your HQ, and then for people that are not necessarily great at geography, I'm just estimating that from New York to Atlanta is hundreds of miles, isn't it? I mean, it's like states away.
Yeah, thousands, and I must tell you that worse than that, it's just the difference between the North and the South, and there's so much different about Atlanta and New Jersey, and yet this is, forget about the geography and the culture, other than losing people because of some of that. The part of the reason for the move was totally in keeping with customer centricity. There were limits in what that physical plant could do where they were. Okay. They didn't have a cutting-edge technology center. They didn't have innovation centers that would allow them to create around the customer. And so it also positions them closer to the manufacturing plant in Alabama, where the brand immersion center is. So even the decision to relocate was in keeping with positioning the brand for greater customer innovation.
Crumbs, yeah, but come on, how to give yourself a major headache in the middle of a big program.
Yeah, but it always is that way. I mean, I think that's the beauty. If you're really disciplined in your focus, you're going to have distractions, but you still don't vary from the music. And unfortunately, so many brands get distracted by so many things, and customer experience gets put on the margin. It's such a nice to have, but the reality is Forrester just came out with a study that 92% of leadership teams have customer experience as a centerpiece of their strategic planning. Mm-hmm. The question is, do they maintain that priority with their behavior?
Yeah, but you can counter that, Joseph, with other sort of research which says, 80+% of companies think they're delivering great service to their customers, and that yet when you ask their customers, their customers will respond in single digits that say yes, they're delivering great service to us.
Yeah, and in the U.S., the American Customer Satisfaction Index just is at a 9-year low for customer satisfaction in the midst of this time when all these leadership bodies are prioritizing. It's why, Adrian, they need you. I'm just being really candid. Companies need some guides through this journey, a Sherpa to help them stay on course, be their conscience, give them some best practices. You really don't need to zig left because it doesn't get you much, but stay on the right lane. Sure. I mean, I think that's the stuff that external support consultants can do for brands. And clearly people like Leo Arussi and myself were involved in the Mercedes Benz journey in much those ways.
Yeah, yeah. So let's get, then the next part of the story, which is the really tricky part, and this is slightly different to some organizations because when you're in, particularly in automotive and other industries, there's a franchisor-franchisee arrangement. And what's interesting about the automotive industry, so I've got an automotive client, and so I understand a little bit about some of the incentives and some of the trickiness of the incentives, is that when you're a franchisee and you're in car sales and things, it's traditionally all been about numbers and how many people you close, how many units you shift, and all that sort of stuff. And so realigning the incentives must have been sort of tricky. So can you tell me a little bit about how you did that, so get people sort of on the same song sheet, as it were?
Well, and I think you have to sell people on the vision that there's urgency to getting this customer thing dialed up right, or else there's going to be such churn and your future is going to be in peril. And I think that argument had been made, and business people say, okay, if you can show me the money, that there's some risk, and if you can give me a benefit if I do it well, I will play with you in collaboration. So it really did take a collaboration to renegotiate the incentive program. The financial compensation in car dealers is based on margin, and so most you either have a fixed portion of the margin on every car sales that's guaranteed to to a dealer from the manufacturer, and then there's almost always a variable performance. Are you using the certified products in your service bay? Do you have the right inventory? All that kind of stuff is involved in your variable margin. Well, basically what Mercedes did was say, please give us a portion of your guaranteed fixed margin and make it variable based on customer experience and metrics on customer experience. And who's going to do that, right? I'm going to volunteer what I'm guaranteed and put it at risk based on my performance around the customer. And so they negotiated that, and they said, I'll tell you, what Mercedes did is said, anything that previously was on a variable basis, we would keep the breakage. So if people didn't perform and get it, we kept it at Mercedes Benz. But now instead of doing that, we'll give that back to the dealer body if you'll put more of your money at risk, based on performance and customer experience. And so that give take thing, that negotiation resulted in having a pretty sizable portion of the U.S. margin predicated on pleasing customers, and that really was. But it's interesting,
it's interesting that you talk about that, because it sounds like the negotiation was that it was a very organic, iterative sort of approach, because it had to recognise all the different concerns of all the different parties of what was going on. Where you've got head office wants this and selling the vision and things, and then the dealerships are saying, you've got to basically they're saying to you, you've got to help protect me and my business, and also my sales kind of people or my frontline people, to make sure that we don't lose.
Yeah, put your money behind it. If you think this is so dang important at corporate, put some money behind it. Put yourself at risk a little bit here
give
as
us a
well.
Safety net, right?
Yeah, and I think it was, it sounds so lovely now. It was not so pretty.
But hard work, man, to get that sort of stuff going.
Exactly, but when people left the room with the agreement, everybody was fine. It was just the making of the sausage was a little less than beautiful.
Let me ask: does that mean that you're implying that when you're talking about the franchisor and the franchisee, are they talking? Did the metrics then come first, and the metrics came before the culture change, or was actually the both things went in parallel?
Well, they went in parallel. I mean, basically the articulation of why we needed to do it came first. Then second was the customer journey mapping. So we needed to make sure we understood the touch points cradle to grave. Then they needed to get metrics that could accurately capture the voice of the customer in meaningful ways at different high value touch points. And then came the discussion of how will we link performance at those core touch points on this customer metric to a little bit more variable margin, and that's how the journey went, and then it took off like wildfire, because once you have some leverage and you have some ability to affect and improve the customer experience and measure people and reward people on performance, now you've got all the core ingredients to transform your business quickly.
Yeah, I mean it sounds very simple, but there's a really, really powerful point in there, and I think it's the case of it's almost the case of, that sort of, there's a saying is, what would you do if you couldn't lose? And that's almost like what the deal that's been negotiated is like, just to get us started. Let's figure out what you would do, or what we can do if you couldn't lose.
Right, and the beauty of that is it takes out an element of fear, right? I mean, if we can just get our fear out of the way and we just do what we boldly need to do to win, let's take that ground, right? And that's what really had to happen, and it's what did happen, and it's what doesn't happen in so many businesses. There's so many excuses, and we've tried this before, and blah blah blah. Right now your customer needs you today.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. I think it's a really, really powerful sort of kind of point around performance and breaking inertia and getting things kind of going. Is almost like, people are predominantly driven by their fear of risk and uncertainty and what they might lose, because that's still to do with our survival instinct. But if you can bolster that and take that fear away, then the possibilities are crazy.
Yeah, and we can maintain the status quo, and there's risk in that too, and there should be some fear in that. I mean, at Mercedes, the implication was if you want to churn more and more of your customers out the door to your competitors and not have them keep coming back to your service bay, then let's continue to be 22nd in customer satisfaction. So go for it.
Fantastic. So where, are you still kind of working? I mean, I know you've just signed 2,000 kind of books and to send up to kind of Canada. I mean, and this book was sort of written last year. Now, where are Mercedes Benz USA now on their sort of journey, as it were? Is it kind of just moved on, or they?
No, we're still going, and I'll tell you that the big transformation right now that's being worked on is what we call the golden record, and this is just kind of interesting. In the automotive industry, everything in the U.S. at least is based on VIN numbers. So the car is the center of the world. Surprise, surprise, right? So you may own 20 different cars, and they have different VIN numbers, and they all have your name attached to them, but they don't integrate in the database very well. What if we had your name, much like an Apple ID, we had your name vis-a-vis an email address, and then we had all of your cars surrounding you, all of your products surrounding you at the center. Then we can actually operate more from a customer relationship management database as opposed to an automotive VIN number database. And so that conversion is going on right now. Along with that is the fully integrated car, and we're trying to anticipate in the future, how is that going to play? So theoretically, someday you'll be driving down the road, your tire gauge will send a message to the dealership telling them that your car front left tire is going out. You'll get a message back through the console on your car from the dealership saying, we just got this alert. You can certainly come in. We can send a technician to you where you are right now. If you do come in as you're driving in, the car will notify the dealership that you're approaching. You will be greeted by name. Everything will be taken care of. Your preferred method of payment will be taken care of. We'll be able to fix your car. If it's going to be we'll know before we contact you that we have the parts and inventory that you require. If you are going to need a courtesy vehicle, that will all have been pre-worked through in the big data analysis of the need. And on a daily basis, we might be sending you out a message about things of interest to you through your car, maybe get you tickets to the British Open, whatever it might be. And now, instead of having an episodic relationship with you as a consumer, every time you have routine maintenance or an extreme need for service, now we can actually have daily relationship with you, much like my brand Starbucks does in the daily ritual with their customers.
Sure. And I think what's interesting about what you say, I mean, because there's lessons there for other, if you like, product-centric kind of companies. I mean, all I need to think about is, is like an insurance company or a utility company. If you call them, and then the first thing they're going to ask you for is your policy number or your account number, and you think about it and go, well, that's because they're organized around that rather than around you.
Absolutely. So you need your policy number. I need to know you, and if there's any specific way I could know you, your email address or whatever. I mean, look up your name and verify an email address, and the next thing I know, I have all your policy numbers. I don't really need you to know your policy number.
Well, exactly.
You're not policy number. You are Adrian.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. So, Joseph, just conscious of time and just thinking about. I don't want to give too much of the contents of the book away because I want people to go and buy the book, obviously. But if I was to say to you, okay, you've got somebody listening in or reading the highlights of this interview, and they have had a bit of an epiphany, and they're going, yeah, we're pretty much a product-centric company, and we need to kind of change and kick off our own sort of change process or change our orientation. I mean, given your experience with Mercedes-Benz and other companies, I mean, where would you advocate that they start with that whole process? I mean, if you go right back to the beginning, where do they start?
I think you have to do a SWOT analysis of where you are in your customer experience today, what the opportunities comport for your future. And then basically what I would say at that juncture is kind of imagine how big and what your objectives are, what the KPIs are going to look like, how your world's going to be different if you nail this thing, how it's going to be better on your customers and ultimately better for yourself and loyalty and engagement and all the like. And then once you've done that, I think it's about socializing throughout your organization. This is the journey you're going to take them on. And then trust people like yourself to be guides along the journey. Seek them out. The consultation in this relative to the return is pretty fabulous in terms of an investment. So that's where I would go, and certainly has worked for the brands that I've been a part of their journey. It's been fabulous to watch them grow, sustain, and engage customers in a very competitive marketplace.
Brilliant. So, Joseph, that brings me to my final question, and I always say this: it's my famous final question. It's famous in my own head, but if I keep calling it a famous last question, then it will become famous at some point. So, anyway, indoctrination of my listeners and readers. That's what it is. So, my final question is this, which I always ask on these interviews: is there anything that you would like to shamelessly plug as we bring this interview to a close?
No. That's my answer. And I think the famous answer should be that, because really, in the end, if we are plugging ourselves in this process, if that's the purpose of getting on these things, then I think we're denying the very business that we're in. We're in this for customers, you know. So Drucker said that we're not in business to create a profit, we're in business to create a customer. I think all of us should be focused on our customers, not in what we have to offer. If we focus on our customers, they'll come to us. Yeah. We can talk to them all we want about what we have to offer. So the answer is no.
Well, Joseph, thank you so much. I mean, it's an opportunity for people to pitch things, to plug things, even to plug things which are very left field, like their local charity or something else. So I always like to ask it, because actually I'm always continually surprised about the route and the options that people can take when in response to that question. Some people are just baffled by it.
I love the question. I don't want to plug in.
No, that's fine. That's fine. But Joseph, I'll make sure I get all this edited up and linked up and give the book a big shout out. But just wanted to say thank you for your time today. That's been a real pleasure, for sharing your insights and the experience with Mercedes Benz. It's a really fantastic story. And yeah, just thanks. That's been brilliant.
Hey, thank you very much for allowing me on the show today, Adrian.
That's my pleasure, Joseph. Thanks very much for being here. That's been great.